I was running through the forest, a killer chasing me with a knife, and just when I thought it was over, he appeared with an axe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you want more thrilling stories like this. The night was so silent that even my own heartbeat felt too loud. I ran through the trees, branches scratching my skin, and I knew he was still behind me, the man with a knife who had been following me since the road. I tripped and fell into the dirt. My breath caught in my throat, and as his footsteps closed in I thought it was the end, but then a strong hand pulled me up from the ground. It was a forester, tall and broad, with an axe on his shoulder and a flashlight that cut through the darkness. Run behind me, he said in a low voice that broke no argument. The killer lunged, his knife glinting, but the forester swung his axe with such force that the sound echoed like thunder through the woods. The stranger stumbled back, cursing, and for a moment all I could do was cling to the man who had saved me. The forester stood like an iron wall, his eyes locked on the attacker, and I knew I was safe, but the night was not over. The killer was still breathing, still holding his knife. And in that terrifying dark forest the fight for my life had just begun. The killer growled like a wounded animal and circled us, his knife glinting in the faint moonlight. The forester pushed me back with one arm while keeping his axe raised. "You won't touch her," he said, his voice steady as stone. The man sprang forward and the clash was sudden, steel against steel. The knife scraped against the axe blade with a sharp cry. I could hear my own breath tearing out of my chest as the struggle unfolded. The forester swung again, this time catching the attacker's shoulder and sending him sprawling into the leaves. But he didn't stay down. He came back up, snarling, his eyes burning with madness. "Run," the forester whispered to me, but my feet wouldn't move. I watched as the two men clashed in the dirt, the axe crashing against the knife in a deadly dance. Blood splattered, sweat dripped, the forest echoed with their grunts. Then, with one final swing, the forester struck the knife from the killer's hand and kicked him to the ground. He kneeled, pressing his axe to the man's throat. "It's over," he said, his voice like thunder. I stumbled forward, tears in my eyes. The forester turned to me, his face shadowed but his gaze gentle. "You're safe now," he said. But somehow I knew this nightmare was not truly finished. The killer's eyes still burned with hatred, and in the distance, someone else was moving through the trees. The sound of twigs snapping grew louder. Another shadow shifted between the trees. My heart stopped as I realized the killer hadn't come alone. The forester lifted his head, his eyes narrowed. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low but urgent. The figure emerged, a second man with a heavy iron pipe in his hand. He smiled cruelly when he saw the first attacker pinned to the ground. "You think you can stop us both?" he snarled. The forester didn't flinch. He pressed his boot harder into the first man's chest and raised his axe. The air was thick with tension. My hands trembled as I clutched the forester's jacket. The new stranger charged, swinging his pipe. The forester met him head-on. The crash of metal against wood echoed through the forest like a gunshot. Sparks flew. The first killer took his chance to scramble up, blood dripping from his shoulder. I screamed as both men closed in. The forester gritted his teeth. He struck one with the shaft of his axe, kicked the other back, but they kept coming, relentless. I felt hope slipping away until I saw the forester glance at me, his eyes sharp, as if he had a plan. "Get the rope, now," he shouted, pointing to his backpack lying by a tree. I ran for it, my hands fumbling, the night air shaking with the sounds of battle, and I knew that whether we lived or died depended on these next few seconds. My fingers dug into the backpack, finding the coarse rope inside. I dragged it out just as a scream ripped through the forest. I turned and saw the forester on his knees, his shoulder bleeding where the pipe had struck. But his axe was still in his hand. He slammed the blade into the ground to catch his balance. "Throw it," he roared. I hurled the rope with all my strength, He caught it in one swift motion and whipped it around the first killer's arms, yanking him to the ground. The man howled, fighting, but the forester tied him so tightly he couldn't move. The second attacker snarled and rushed for me, his pipe raised. I screamed, but the forester was faster. He tackled him into the leaves. The two men wrestled, dirt and blood staining the earth. The pipe clanged to the ground. I kicked it away into the darkness. The forester's hands were like iron. He pinned the stranger down, his face a mask of fury. "You chose the wrong night," he hissingly said, then knocked him unconscious with a brutal strike. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breath. The forester stood, his chest heaving, blood on his shirt. He looked at me with steel in his eyes. "We need to leave, there could be more," he said, taking my hand and pulling me into the shadowy depths of the forest. I knew we had escaped this fight, but the night was far from over. Someone had sent these men, and out there, in the blackness of the trees, the real master of this hunt was still waiting. We moved quickly through the forest, branches snapping under our feet, my heart still pounding like a drum. The forester's hand never let go of mine, his grip strong, urging me forward. Behind us the two men lay bound and broken, but the silence that followed was wrong, too heavy, too watchful. "Someone's tracking us," he murmured, his voice low. I swallowed hard. The dark seemed to breathe around us. Then far ahead a flicker of light, a lantern, swung between the trees. Another shadowy figure waiting. They knew I'd interfere, the forester said, his jaw tight. I froze, realization striking me. "You mean they were after you?" He shook his head, his eyes glinting with something between anger and fear. "No. They were after you, and I need to know why." The lantern grew brighter as the figure stepped into view, a man in a dark coat with a rifle resting on his shoulder. He smiled when he saw us. "Run all you want," he called, his voice cold. "She belongs to us." The forester pulled me behind him, his axe ready. "Over my dead body," he said, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a war that had just begun. The man with the rifle lifted it slowly, the metal glinting under the moonlight. My breath stuck in my throat. The forester stepped in front of me, his broad shoulders forming a wall. "Stay low," he whispered. Then the shot cracked through the forest like lightning. The bullet splintered a tree trunk just inches from us. Bark rained down. I screamed. The forester didn't hesitate. He snatched a heavy branch from the ground and hurled it into the darkness. The figure stumbled back, his lantern falling, its light rolling wildly across the leaves. In that chaos the forester pulled me to the ground and we crawled behind a fallen log. "He won't stop until you're dead or taken," he said between heavy breaths. "Why you? Who are these men?" My lips trembled as I whispered, "I don't know. I swear I don't know." The rifleman fired again, the blast shaking the night. The forester's eyes hardened. "We need to turn the hunt around," he said, his voice like steel. He touched my face, gentle even in the midst of fear. "Trust me, do exactly as I say." He handed me his flashlight and kept the axe for himself. "When I move, you blind him. Then I finish this." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the light, but when he nodded, I knew there was no other way. The forester sprang up, a shadow among the trees, and I rose with him, the flashlight beam cutting the dark, blinding the rifleman. He cursed and shielded his eyes, and in that second the forester struck, his axe swinging like thunder through the night. The rifleman stumbled back, the axe blade grazing his arm and knocking the gun into the dirt. He howled in pain, grabbing for a knife at his belt, but the forester was faster. He slammed into him like a falling tree, driving him against the trunk with such force the wood cracked. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Their shadows wrestled in the chaotic beam, grunts and blows mixing with the sound of the forest. The rifleman tried to stab, but the forester caught his wrist and twisted until the blade dropped. His voice was a snarl, "You don't get to touch her." Then he drove his forehead into the man's face. Blood sprang. The killer slumped to the ground, breathing heavily, still alive but broken. The forester stood over him, his axe ready for the final strike. But he stopped, his chest rising and falling. He turned to me, his eyes burning with questions. "They knew your name," he said, his voice low. "They weren't just random strangers. Someone sent them. Someone who wants you gone." I trembled, the words slicing into me deeper than any knife. "But why? Why me?" The forest was silent now, yet the feeling of being watched hadn't left, and when the forester lifted his head, scanning the darkness, I realized with horror that this was only the beginning, because far beyond the trees, hidden in the shadows, more footsteps were coming. The footsteps multiplied, crunching through the leaves from every direction. My stomach turned to ice. The forester lifted his axe, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the shadows moving between the trees. "There are too many," he muttered, his voice calm but edged with grim resolve. He grabbed my hand, pulling me behind him as he dragged the rifleman's lantern from the ground. He smashed it against a rock, oil burst and flames erupted, lighting the forest with a sudden wall of fire. Dark figures froze beyond the flames, their eyes reflecting like predators. "This will buy US time," he said. He yanked the rifle from the ground and shoved it into my hands. "Can you shoot?" I shook my head, my hands trembling too hard to hold it steady. "Then just point if you have to," he said, raising his axe again. The figures began to move, circling, their faces hidden but their intent clear. They weren't here to rob, they were here to take me. The forester's voice dropped to a whisper, "Whoever wants you." "They won't stop." The flames crackled, the night felt alive with hate, and as the shadows closed in, I realized we stood at the edge of something far more terrifying than just murderers in the woods. This was a hunt, and I was the prize. The circle of shadows tightened, their footsteps sinking like a drumbeat. My pulse raced. The forester's eyes never left them, his breath controlled, like a wolf about to strike. "When I say run, you run and don't look back," he whispered, but I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I won't leave you." Before he could answer, one of the figures leapt through the flames, his coat igniting. He screamed but kept coming, knife in hand. The forester met him with a crushing swing. The axe blade drove into his chest and the man collapsed instantly. The sight made the others hesitate, their shadows shifting, unsure. "Good," the forester said under his breath. "Fear is on our side." Then a voice rose from the darkness, calm, controlled, different from the chaos. "Enough," it said, deep and cold. The men froze, parting, and from the trees stepped a tall figure in a long coat, his face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood just beyond the firelight. "She comes with me," he said, his voice like ice. The forester planted his feet, his axe glistening with blood and ash. "Over my dead body," he growled. The figure lifted his head just enough for me to see a cruel smile curl beneath the shadow. "That," he said, "can be arranged." And with a snap of his fingers, the others surged forward, the firelight flickering wildly as the night exploded into war. The forest erupted in screams and steel. The first man through the flames ran straight into the forester's axe, blood splashing the ground. I lifted the rifle with shaking hands, my finger tightening on the trigger. One of them came for me, his face masked, his eyes wild. I fired, the blast thundered through the trees. He dropped, writhing. The kick of the gun nearly tore it from my arms, but adrenaline kept me up. The forester fought like a beast. Every swing of his axe dropped another shadow. Yet for every one that fell, two more stepped through the fire. The tall man in the hat just stood and watched, his smile never fading. "She's stronger than she looks," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Bring her to me alive." My heart froze. Alive? He wanted me alive. Why me? The forester shoved one attacker into the flames, his screams echoing as the body burned. Then he turned to me. "We can't hold them off forever," he said, his breath heavy. "We need to break through." But the men closed in from all sides, a wall of knives and shadows. The forester grabbed my hand again, his blood-slick fingers intertwined with mine. "When I move, you stay with me. Don't let go no matter what," he whispered, his eyes burning like fire. Then he roared, lifted his axe high, and charged straight at the tall man in the hat. The axe came down with a crash, but the tall man moved with impossible speed. His hand shot out and caught the wooden shaft before it hit. The forester strained, his muscles bulging, but the man held it as if he were made of stone. His eyes glinted under the brim of his hat, cold and inhuman. "Impressive," he said quietly, "but futile." With a twist of his wrist he wrenched the axe free and sent the forester staggering back. The crowd of men cheered wickedly. I aimed the rifle, my hands trembling, and fired. The shot blasted through the night, but the tall man moved again. The bullet whined past him, striking a tree. He turned his head toward me, smiling as if my efforts amused him. "She has fire," he said. "Yes, she is the one." My heart thundered. What did he mean? Why me? The forester lunged again, his fists crashing into the man's chest. This time it made him stagger a half step. The cheer of the crowd died to a hiss. The forester spun, wrenched his axe back from the ground and stood tall, blood dripping down his face. "If you want her," he growled, "you'll have to kill me." The tall man lifted his chin, his eyes burning like embers in the shadow. "That was always the plan," he said. And with a snap of his fingers the rest of the men surged forward all at once, the forest erupting into pure chaos. The mob crashed against us like a wave. The forester swung his axe in a wide arc, the blade splitting through two men at once. Blood sprayed the firelight. I pulled the rifle tight against my shoulder and fired. The sound shattered the night. One man dropped. Another stumbled back, screaming, but there were too many, too fast. The forester took a blow to the ribs, staggered, then brought his knee up into his attacker's face with a crunch. I felt hands grab my arm, yanking me back. I screamed, kicking wildly. The rifle fell from my hands. The forester turned at the sound of my cry, his eyes wild with fury. He hurled his axe end over end. It spun through the firelight and burst into the chest of the man who held me. The force tore him off his feet and drove him into the earth. The forester ripped the axe free as he pulled me behind him again. "Stay with me," he roared, his voice raw. The tall man in the hat just watched, his arms crossed, his smile cruel, as if all this blood was just a game. "You can't hold them forever," he said, his voice calm, mocking. "She will be mine." The forester spat blood into the dirt, his eyes like burning coals. "Over my dead body," he repeated, his axe dripping red, and in that moment, I realized that he meant every word. He would die here in this forest before he let them take me. But the question that burned in my chest was more terrifying than any blade. Why did this stranger want me so badly? The tall man lifted his hand and the fighting stopped as if the forest itself obeyed him. His men stepped back, circling us like hungry wolves but waiting. Their chests heaved, their knives dripped, but they held still. The fire crackled between the trees, painting his shadow long and terrifying. "She doesn't know yet," he said smoothly, his voice rolling through the silence. "She has no idea what she is." My stomach twisted, his words sliced deeper than the fear. The forester shifted his stance, his axe low, ready. "Say another word and I end you," he growled. The tall man chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you can hide her forever? She was marked long before she met you." He lifted his glove and in the glow of the fire I saw a symbol branded into his palm, a twisted spiral within a circle. It seemed to move, to breathe. My heart raced, because on my wrist, half faded under the dirt and blood, I had the same mark. The forester's eyes snapped to mine, widening in shock. "No," he whispered, as if everything suddenly made sense. The tall man smiled like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Now she knows," he said. "Now she understands why she can't escape me." The fire crackled louder. The circle of men closed in again, and I realized with terror that this wasn't just a hunt, it was a prophecy, and I was at the heart of it. My breath caught, the symbol on my wrist burned as if awakened by his words, a heat that spread through my arm and into my chest. The forester grabbed my hand, his touch steady even as his eyes filled with fear. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice raw. "You're not his. You're not what he thinks." But the mark throbbed harder, a pulse beating in time with my heart. The tall man stepped closer to the edge of the flames, his hat shadowing his face. "She was born with it," he said, his voice slow, deadly, "a key to an old power, locked away in these woods, and I've waited long enough to claim it." His men shifted, restless, as if the earth itself listened to him. The forester lifted his axe, placing himself between us. "She isn't yours," he growled. "And if you want her, you'll have to go through me." The tall man laughed, low and cold. "Exactly what I planned." He lifted his hand high and the symbol in his palm began to glow. The flames around us roared suddenly, shooting higher into the night sky. The men howled like beasts, their eyes shining unnaturally bright. The forest felt alive. The trees groaned, the air pulsed. I clutched the forester's arm, my body shaking, and for the first time I realized this was no longer just a battle against men. It was a battle against something far older, something that had marked me long before I knew his name. The ground trembled as if the forest itself breathed, leaves shivered without wind, and the flames bent toward the tall man like worship. The symbol on my wrist burned so fiercely I cried out, falling to my knees. The forester dropped beside me, his strong arms wrapping around my shoulders. "Focus on my voice," he said, his breath hot against my ear. "Not him, not the mark, just me." But the power inside me surged like a flood, and for a moment I saw strange images: trees splitting open, rivers boiling, the sky red with fire, visions that felt like memories that were not mine. The tall man spread his arms as if welcoming me into the storm. "She remembers," he whispered, his voice laced with triumph. "The bloodline wakes." His men chanted, a low, rhythmic drone that made the earth itself shake. The forester rose, placing himself between me and that dark figure, his axe glistening with sweat and blood. "I don't care what she is," he snarled. "She's not yours to take." He swung the axe, the blade catching the light like a falling star. But the tall man raised his hand and the symbol in his palm blasted a wave of force. The impact slammed into the forester and threw him back against a tree. The sound of his body hitting wood made my heart split. "No!" I screamed, crawling toward him, blood trickling from his mouth. He struggled to his feet, eyes fierce even in pain. "Run," he begged, "before he takes you." But I knew running was no longer enough. The darkness wanted me, and the fire inside my veins was starting to answer back. The mark on my wrist burned like liquid fire, spreading up my arm until my whole body trembled. I gasped as light poured from my skin and pulses, bright enough to blind the men circling us. They stumbled back, covering their eyes. The forester stared at me, stunned, but even through the blood on his face he whispered, "It's you. You're the power he's been hunting." The tall man stepped through the flames unharmed, his hat casting shadows over eyes that glowed like embers. "She awakens," he said, his voice reverent. "At last the key returns to open the gate." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What gate?" I cried, but before he could answer, the forester pushed himself off the tree, his axe shaking in his hands. "Don't listen," he roared, staggering back to stand in front of me. "You're not his weapon, you're not his." The tall man laughed, low and chilling. "She was never yours to protect, woodsman. She was written in the earth long before you were born." He raised his hand again, the symbol on his palm blazing, and the ground split open between us, a crack tearing through roots and rocks. From its depths came a howl, not human, not animal, but something far older, something that should never have been freed. The forester threw himself in front of me, arms wide, his voice raw. "If you want her, you'll have to drag me into hell with you." And as the shadows began to rise from the chasm, I realized that was exactly what the tall man intended to do. The chasm yawned wider, belching out black smoke that smelled of ash and blood. Shadowy hands clawed at the earth, pulling themselves into our world, creatures made of darkness, their eyes like cinders, their howls splitting the night. My body shook as the mark on my wrist pulsed in time with their rise. They were drawn to me, like hungry dogs to meat. The tall man lifted his arms, his voice booming like a prayer. The gate opens, the bloodline calls, she is the key. His men knelt around the fire as if worshipping him. The forester planted his feet in front of me, blood streaming from his wounds, his axe raised high. "I don't care if she is your key or your curse, she's under my protection." His voice shook, but his eyes burned with unbreakable fury. The creatures slithered forward, their claws digging into the earth. The firelight danced on their hideous forms, and my heart pounded until I could barely breathe. The power inside me surged again, hotter, brighter, until my veins felt like they were on fire. I screamed, and the symbol on my wrist erupted with light, a blinding blast that threw the first wave of creatures back into the pit. The forester turned to me, his face pale, his eyes wide. "You can stop this," he whispered. "You're the only one who can." But the tall man just smiled through the chaos, his teeth sharp, his voice certain. "No, she can't stop it. She can only open it wider." And with that, he stepped straight into the chasm and vanished, his laughter echoing from the depths as the earth trembled like it was about to swallow us all. The ground shook so violently I fell to my knees, the crack in the earth splintering like a web, flames erupting from its depths. The creatures clung to the edge, howling, some crawling free, their shapes half human, half shadow. The forester grabbed my arm, dragging me up, his eyes burning with desperation. "You have to close it," he shouted over the roar. "Whatever he's unleashed, you're the only one who can seal it back." My heart raced, the mark on my wrist blazed like a brand, the heat so strong it felt as if it would consume me from the inside out. "I don't know how," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "I don't even know what I am." The forester shook me, his voice raw. "Then listen to the woods, listen to the light inside you. It's already fighting them." The creatures swarmed. The forester swung his axe, taking them down one by one, his body shaking from blood loss but his will unbroken. Behind him the chasm pulsed like a heartbeat, each beat wider, darker, until the trees around us cracked. The sky itself seemed to split. My hand trembled as I raised it, the symbol glowing brighter than the flames. A sound built in my chest, a cry that wasn't just mine but ancient, echoing. The creatures hesitated, their eyes turning to me. The forester stopped, his face lit by my light. "Do it," he roared, "before it takes everything." And with one last scream I poured all the fire in my veins into the mark, sending a blast of light straight into the chasm. The earth howled, the creatures shrieked, and the tall man's laughter rose from below, not afraid, but triumphant, as if this was what he wanted all along. The light ripped through the chasm, slamming into the depths like 1,000 lightning strikes. The creatures shrieked as they were dragged back screaming into the pit, their shadowy forms burning to ash. The earth shook harder, trees splintered, stones split, and for a moment it seemed like the rift was shrinking, closing. But then a blinding flash erupted from below and a figure shot up through the fire. The tall man, his coat in tatters, his hat gone, his eyes now burning like two fiery suns. He landed before us, the ground cracking under his boots, and smiled. "Yes," he said, his voice resonating like a choir of voices. "You have opened it wider, just as I needed." My heart stopped. I fell backward, the power in my veins still surging, but unstable. Like a wildfire out of control, the forester stumbled to my side, his axe in hand though his body shook from blood loss. "Stay behind me," he croaked, but the tall man lifted his hand and the entire forest seemed to bow. Branches snapped, roots tore through the soil. The sky itself turned darker. "The gate is open, the hunt is over," he said, his voice like thunder. "Now the world belongs to what comes next." Behind him, inside the chasm, something colossal began to stir, a shape far too massive to be human. Its eyes like galaxies, its breath a wind that shook the earth. The forester turned to me, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's not him anymore. It's what he serves." His hand clutched mine, tight, desperate. "If we don't end this now, nothing will survive." And with the monster rising, the tall man laughing, and the light still burning in my blood, I realized our fight was no longer for the forest. It was for the world itself. The earth shuddered as the colossal shape rose from the chasm, its eyes burning like dying stars, its voice a low rumble that shook my bones. The tall man spread his arms, his body nothing more than a vessel now. "Behold," he cried, "the dawn of a new age." The creatures howled. The forest cracked, the sky split. I felt myself slipping, the mark consuming me, until the forester's hand closed around mine, his blood warm, his voice ragged but fierce. "You're not his key, you're your own, his." Words cut through the chaos like a blade. My heart caught, and I understood. The light inside me wasn't made to open, it was made to destroy. I screamed, letting the fire erupt, my body a beacon that split the night. The chasm shrieked, the monster roared, and the tall man's laughter turned into a scream as the light tore through him, through his creatures, through the gate itself. The earth heaved one final time and collapsed, swallowing the flames, the darkness, and the monster back into nothing. Silence fell, only the crackle of dying fires remaining. I slumped against the forester, my body weak, the mark on my wrist fading into a scar. He held me close, his breath shaky. "It's over," he whispered, but his eyes scanned the shattered trees, the blood-soaked ground. "For now," I breathed, because deep in the pit that was no longer there, I could still feel an echo, a whisper promising that darkness never dies, it only waits. And I knew our fight wasn't the end of a story, it was the beginning of a war.